Hello, everyone, and welcome to FCC's virtual event, Empowering Women's Roles in Farm Safety. My name is Caitlin Dubin, and I am so excited to be your host today. I myself am a grain farmer from Southern Alberta. I'm a storyteller and I'm a community builder. I have had the absolute privilege of celebrating the stories of women in agriculture through my podcast, the Rural Women Podcast, since 2019. And honestly, I think FCC picked the perfect day for a farmer to host as we are getting much needed rain on our crops today. I hope wherever you are, in whatever season you are, it is going well. You're getting just the right amount of rain and the amount of sunshine that you need. Due to the popularity of FCC's most recent women's series, they have decided to extend the series and bring to you another 5 episodes throughout the year. I would like to thank you all for joining us here today. We are going to spend the next hour together. And today we are going to learn from Lori Brookhouse, who will discuss the evolving role of women in Canadian farming, their unique safety risks, and their contributions to farm safety initiatives. While today's session is being delivered virtually, wherever we find ourselves in Canada, we are on traditional Indigenous territories with rich traditions, stories, and histories that we have an opportunity to be curious about and to honor. I want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from my farm in Southern Alberta on Treaty 7 territory. This recognition is more than an acknowledgement of territory. This is about recognizing Indigenous people from across Canada as the caretakers of the land that we live and work and honor. May we continue to learn and unlearn. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Lori Brookhouse, there is a little bit of housekeeping. This session will be recorded and a link will be sent out to everyone who has registered. So if you must get away or you want to share with a family member, it will be available to you in an email in the next few days. A recording of this event will also be put up on the FCC YouTube channel at a later date. If you have any technical questions, there is a blue support button down on the lower part of your screen. And as you may have noticed, there is a chat on the right-hand side of your screen. Drop a hello in there and let us know where you're dialing in from today. And we love it when you're active in the chat throughout Lori's presentation so we can give her all of the information when she's done. Beside the chat, there is a Q&A box, and Lori is going to answer all of your questions at the end of her presentation. I am happy to ask as many questions as you have, so be sure to put a lot of questions in the Q&A. There will also be polling questions, which will be posted throughout the presentation for you to participate in. So please take a quick moment to complete any questions once they become available. All right, are you ready? Let me introduce you to our keynote speaker, Lori Brookhouse, the owner of Vital Insight Safety and Human Resource Counseling. Lori shares 17 years experience in occupational health and safety and provides actionable takeaways that you can use on your farm. Lori resides in Bible Hill, Nova Scotia, and I am so happy to welcome Lori to the stage. Hello, my friend.
Hi, Caitlin. How are you doing?
I'm doing so well. We're so excited for your presentation today. I don't want to take any more time away from you. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you again, Caitlin. I also would like to begin to thank Farm Credit Canada for inviting me to be one of the 5 presentation in this year's Women's Series. It's an honor to be here and share with what I'm going to share with you today. I appreciate FCC's efforts to support women in agriculture as they have over many, many years. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to actually contribute to this conversation. So without any further ado, I think we should get started. So in 2021, women made up 30.4% of Canadian farm operators, a historic increase since 1991. Yet they face unique safety challenges that are often overlooked. And I pulled this out of the Canadian Agriculture at a Glance, and I thought this was very interesting. That is a large time span, but still a huge, significant increase in the number of women operators. to be at 30.4%. So just a little food for thought before we dive too deep into the into the conversation today. So thinking about women in agriculture and even your role, and whoever happens to be on the call, whether you're producers, supporters of the ag industry, any capacity that you have, friends, family that you know that are deep in agriculture, do they feel safe and supported? How can women and how can we ensure women in agriculture are safe and supported in those roles? And those are some of the things we're going to look at today. So the whole purpose of today's session is basically to highlight women's evolving roles. We're going to look at some safety challenges. You might share some safety challenges of your own with me when we get into some of the polling questions. Their contributions as well as solutions. So what do we do to make things a little bit better? So women in Canadian agriculture, that's going to be our first section that we're going to look at. Who are they? Where did they come from? And then we'll move on to safety challenges for women on farm. The women's contributions to farm safety. Now I can't see who's on the call today, but you might be named in this section right here as one of your contributions to the ag industry. And then we're going to look at some recommendations and future directions. And finally wrap up with a Q&A. I'm going to get some thoughts from you on some topics and see what you took away from the presentation today. So just to give you a little bit about me. Yes, I began my agricultural journey in my grandmother's farm. So many, many years ago, without giving away my age, in the Annapolis Valley here in Nova Scotia. This is where I actually fell in love with farming. And, you know, when you grow up, people say, well, you need to do other things. And so you strive and you do that, but you always come back to agriculture. You can never, ever really leave agriculture once it's ingrained with you. So I worked on different local fruit and vegetable farms, as well as I worked on a pheasant farm, worked with dairy, doing lots of haying. And then to deepen my own knowledge, I actually earned a biology technology diploma from the Nova Scotia Agricultural College, which is today the Dalhousie Agricultural Campus. So I ended up going out west for lack of career opportunities here in the Maritimes. And there I worked for Central Laboratories for Veterinarians in the Animal Resource Center for the University of Calgary, as well as a small animal vet clinic in Calgary as well. My husband also at the same time, and I helped with him as well, which you'll learn, women often have many roles in agriculture. So not only was I the labor force, but also the bookkeeping force of Green Creations, which was here in Nova Scotia, but Brookley Tree and Landscape Services in Calgary. So all of these experiences up to this point kind of introduced me to my role in farm safety, agricultural safety, not what I didn't know and what I needed to know and what I still needed to learn and what I wanted to share. And so this is where I ended up becoming a Canadian registered safety professional, as well as certified health and safety consultant, which now being owner operator of a Vital Insight Safety and Human Resources Consulting. So I have 17 years experience with my own business operating internationally, so throughout Canada and in the US as well. And basically, my role is to advocate for farm safety. So developing those systems, advocating for mental health. My business slogan is an engaged worker is a safe worker. So all of your systems, your physical and your mental systems need to be working to stay safe while you're working in any industry, let alone the high risk industry of agriculture. So as Caitlin mentioned, let's look in the chat. Let's add what's your connection to agriculture or farm safety. So I want you to share a brief connection to agriculture in the chat. So you can include things whether you grew up on a farm, you currently work in ag, or maybe you're just learning about the topic. You're just being introduced, you're curious. So I'm going to give you 1 minute, and then I'm going to follow up with a polling question to write in the chat your connection. And Caitlin, I'm not sure if I can see these. If you can help share some of those comments, that would be great once they start coming in. Do we have anything in there? Okay. So while we take a look at and wait for those moments to come in from, or those comments to come in from the chat, let's bring up our polling question as well, because this may prompt you to want to share a little bit more. So our first polling question is, how familiar are you with safety challenges faced by women in Canadian agriculture? So are you very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar at all? I see some of you are kind of working in ag, but here to learn more today. That's going to be an interesting discussion and feedback from you as well, to see what you want to learn. And then, oh, you grew up on a mixed farm, married, dryland grain farmer. In what area in Canada? In the West, in the East, the Maritimes? Grew up in an ag career, have a farm, responsible for staff working. Oh, yes. Responsibilities of others in in agriculture while you're ahead of the farm and in charge of everything else. We're going to talk about that today as well. There's some great challenges there. Excellent. From Eastern Europe, very interesting. I've traveled through Europe and looked at several different farms. Um, and it's interesting to see the techniques used there of what's happening here. And there's often more labor intensive work happening still in Europe than what is, and here in Nova Scotia the same, but when we look out west, it's very automated. And we're going to look at what automation does too to help women in agriculture. We're going to focus on that a little bit later. All right, do we have the polling answer? So it looks like the bulk of the answers were somewhat familiar. Interesting. So your feedback in this particular category later on is going to be very beneficial to our discussions. So let's move on to see how women are shaping Canadian agriculture and farm safety. So historically, women have always been an integral part into Canadian farms. But historically, they were unrecognized, often labeled as farm wives, farm helpers even, rather than farmers. So let's go back. We're going back. But this is important to note because we have been recognized as secondary participants in the agricultural industry, when really, with what we do to participate, we should be equal to the male farmer as well, like looking at the types of work that we've done. And so it's just kind of interesting how that has built over the years, and we've kind of kept that same stigma. So let's look at the pre-1900. So they played a crucial role. They were planting, harvesting. They did taking care of the livestock, right? Despite their contributions, their efforts were rarely documented and often overshadowed by male-dominated records. They were commonly labeled as farm wives, as I mentioned, or helpers, minimizing their critical roles in agricultural operations. Now, there is a book. If you're interested in diving in this topic a little bit more deeply, there's a book by Carolyn Criado Perez. She wrote Invisible Women, Data Biases and World Design for Men. And there's a specific chapter 7, The Plow Hypothesis, speaks particularly to the background of women in agriculture. So just look that up and take a deeper dive into where that actually comes from. It's a very interesting topic. And Miss Perez is actually quite, she's a British, she's an activist and a feminist. So she's been very active over the years in her role as women in the workplace. Agriculture being one of the major highlights there. So World War I and World War II, women stepped in to fill those labor gaps as men were drafted. They took on essential roles in crop production and farm management, with thousands joining the Women's Land Army in Canada. However, post-war narratives often reverted to male-centric views, diminishing the recognition of their contributions. So a lot of that work, a lot of what they had been doing in agriculture kind of petered out and was overshadowed. So then we get to post-war, to the 1980s. So mechanization, commercialization of farming changed the agricultural dynamics at this point. But women continue to play their vital roles in unpaid labor, bookkeeping, and community networks. Cultural norms and systemic barriers limited their recognition as primary operators, with legal and financial systems favoring male ownership. And you're still going to see a bit of that today, but take a look as we get into 1980 to the early 2000s. So we have feminist movements, which is where Caroline Perez comes into play when she wrote her book. We also look at and begin the era of challenges and challenging the traditional gender norms in agriculture. So we're starting to speak up a little bit more, gaining a little bit more visibility as farm operators, being supported by more organizations like the Canadian Farm Women's Network. Land ownership and basically inheritance laws also started to evolve to include women, giving more equity within those particular financial spectrums. And then from 2000s to today, we are increasingly recognized as primary operators and decision makers in agriculture. And we're going to dive deeper with this census in just a little bit here. And we're looking at women now as that first quote I gave you, 30.4% of farm operators, reflecting a broader societal changes such as improved access to education, training, and you're going to see technology is going to be a key factor here. But even despite these advancements, challenges like gender stereotypes still persist. And there's a couple reasons behind that. And we're going to discuss those as we come up. So our shift in perception. So women are increasingly more recognized as farm operators, leaders, and decision makers. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper to those statistics. And I've got a little chart here that we're going to play with in a second. So in 2021, and this is the latest statistics that I have available through StatsCan, and with this presentation being available later on, if you're looking for those references for any of the information that I'm providing today, it's at the end of the presentation. So when you get a copy, you can scroll to those references and click on them, and you can dive a little bit deeper there as well. So in 2021, 79,795 women were farm operators. So that's that 30.4%. So this is up 2.3% from 2016, which was the first increase since 1991. That's quite a few. That's 20 years gap to just get a 2.3% increase. But we have challenges, and we're going to look at those. One of the things, too, women are more likely to operate smaller one operator farms, work in basically very local systems. So your local farmers markets just within the community or even a few hundred kilometers away, but typically not out of your province. And they also often work in the organic sectors. 60.5% of female operators are 55 plus. So you're looking at women born after 1960 to up to 1970, right? So, and then we see the decline in younger women, so under 35, and those workers decreased by 9.5%. That's a huge decrease when you consider our farm women operators only increased by 2.3% in 20 years. We're decreasing in our younger population, our stronger, more robust population at 9.5%. But we look at Ontario, and they lead with their farm operators with 20,895. Now this chart here, I think this is a pretty good size for you guys to see. Just let me get it centered here. This is from Stats Canada, and it's embedded in the presentation, so you can play with it in here, or you can go to their website. There's the link at the top there. And then it basically gives you some different dynamics of farming. So you have the farms, the farm operators, and your paid labor. So where are they coming from? So our first focus was the farm operators. So we were, being in the women's series, focused on women. So where are they and how are they, right? And the first statistic was all about the operator age. So I like looking at the clustered, maybe it's a little bit small. Let's switch it back. So if we take a look, it's the number of operators by age, and we discovered 55 plus in women. So this is up here, is the number of operators. And then if we go by province, Ontario was the one with the most women operators. Now I'm going to move back to clusters to see if you can see this. So I find you can see it a little bit easier. Um, the dark blue is 55 years and over. The next color blue in the middle is 35 to 54 years. And then the lighter blue is that under 35 that we mentioned that declined by 9.5%. So in Ontario alone, you can see there's our 55 plus, 42,000 operators. But then you look at the Maritimes where I am right now, Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia barely rate. So we need more women operators here in the maritime provinces. And I was just at the Newfoundland Federation of Agricultural Symposium in January and speaking to several operators and producers there. And it was good to see the number of new women operators who had attended the symposium to learn more information on how they can become farm owners. It was really interesting to see, and then to be able to present this. I think the dynamics may shift in the next few years. And then you can see Alberta is coming up to pass with the next 55 and over being 35,550 15 operators, and then Saskatchewan 26,770. So if we just switch it over to operator sex for a second here, and the male female ratio, you can see you see how the numbers of the women operators, but you can still see how many more men are still operating compared to that women. So you can see that significant gap there. And then of course, hours worked. So this is the number of operators by average weekly hours of work on the farm. Now I find this is misrepresentative due to most of the information too that happens to be, and you can see in the progression of history, is that I don't think women log all of the hours they do for farming work, whether it be out there doing the labor work, doing the books, marketing, selling, whatever it be, that I don't think all that time is logged. So this could be misrepresentative, but it is a general overall average. And we're going to talk about why I say that in a little bit, because it also goes back to why we have personal protective equipment that fit men more easily than it is for women, because we look at the average of what's happening in industry overall. And as you could see in our operator sex, oh, didn't click back. There it goes. We have more men, and this is going to be very similar to the construction industry when you're using different types of personal protective equipment, that they're building it, making it, developing it based on that average size man of 5'9" tall. So hit the most you can in that particular audience. So I'm just going to scroll here a little bit further. So what surprises you about the rise in female operators or the decline in younger women? So in the chat, while we move on to evolving roles, I want you to kind of write out what your thoughts are there. What surprises you about the rise in female operators or the decline in younger women? And we're going to use that as a discussion point a little bit later on too. So just enter that into the chat while we look at some evolving roles. So as we already noted, women are involved in all aspects of farming: production, bookkeeping, marketing, leadership roles. So they play, and there is one main role I would say is missing here if you kind of focus on the family farm as a whole, especially throughout all the Canadian provinces, and I would say childcare would be there. Taking care of your family is a huge dynamic on the farm. Not only do you have to take care of the younger children, family members that are not working on farm yet, but then you also have to train, educate, and teach those who can and have the ability and are at the age of to help on the farm throughout those years. So that's a huge role women play to educate and train, as well as mother, if you will. Take care of them, watch them, make sure they survive the day, just like any of us. So Technology's helped quite a bit. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into technology, just so you have a little bit more information on how women are using it. And just a drop here, 72.3% increase in female operators are using the GIS mapping, the 45% increase in auto steer systems. So this is really helpful when we look at the larger types of machinery that are being operated and making it easier for us to operate it ourselves. And then we look at all these roles women are playing on farm, but then they have another role, off farm work. 48.4% of those female operators work off farm. And so this was up from 44.9% in 2015. So more women are working off farm today than they did in 2015 and balancing all those roles. It's a great deal of work. I see a comment here, automation of farming industry has made it easier for women to farm, and I would agree with that. So we're going to dive deeper later on when we look at some of the solutions to getting more women in agriculture. And when they know about these tools that are available, they might have a more comfort in diving into those particular aspects of farming and not being afraid of it. And most of the time, the reason we're afraid, and one other challenge we're going to look at later, is not having the education on where to buy and how to use this equipment, training on how to use the equipment. So let's look at some challenges. I see another comment here. I don't think that wages for women in ag have kept up with men. So with inflation, women are taking roles off farm. Agreed. Absolutely agreed. The value, we have to, instead of being secondary operators and looked at secondary operators being primary operators, then only will wages match, I think. And I will tell you how we can make that happen. And we'll talk about that at towards the end of the presentation. So looking at leadership challenges, we still have those gender stereotypes. They persist. We still have old boys club. That mentality in rural communities is still strong today, but it is changing. It's slowly changing. So a 2018 study I wanted to focus on here found 22% of female farmers faced bias in loan applications, with lenders assuming male relatives were primary decision makers. Even still today, as a business owner, if I go out somewhere with my husband and introduce them from Vital Insight, and they right away go to my husband and ask him questions about Vital Insight. So having the experience that I do and being a business owner as a woman, I'm still seeing that. So I can see in agriculture and you could still see being male dominated, this being a challenge. Limited representation in leadership. So only about 12% of agricultural organizations had female board chairs. Um, it did rise to 18% by 2020, but we're still looking at women being underrepresented in these influential bodies, like even the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. So this limits our ability to be able to shape policy. So without the ability to dive in there and be able to affect change, this is very limiting for us. Access to resources, and I'm sure you will see this, and this being a prominent one, but we'll find out in the polling question that's coming up. Women face barriers in accessing land, capital, equipment, all those resources. Even inheritance practices often favor male heirs, and women report difficulties being able to secure the loans and grants. 30% cited discriminatory practice in financial institutions, and you'll see the reference to the survey at the end, as well as market access. Women-led firms, like I mentioned, are often smaller, more local, so they struggle really to compete in the market, especially dominated by large-scale operations. So access to supply chains, distribution networks, still remains a barrier, with about 20% of women reporting challenges in securing contracts. So let's take a look at the next poll, just to follow this up. So what do you think is the biggest barrier for entering or staying in Canadian agriculture? Is it the gender stereotypes, the lack of safety resources, or even the lack of general financial resources, work-life balance challenges, or the limited leadership opportunities? So I'm going to give you a minute there to answer that poll, and I'm just going to slide over here to the chat. I have a comment here. I did the labor force survey in the 90s, and I had to remind the wives that their activities, meals, errands, helping out the man, that it was work indeed. And I counted their hours worked per week. Stats Canada did not agree. I agree. That is all part of work. And if it was the man who owned the farm and operated the farm, that time would be counted. And it would be counted minute for minute. Absolutely. It's valuable time spent with an important part of those behind the scenes operations that keep the farm running. So it seems most younger families around me are two income. Oh, yes. And typically it's the woman who has an additional off farm job. So might not call themselves a farmer for stats purposes. Absolutely, because they usually define themselves by the role they're getting paid for. How much of the farm work, especially if you're a partnership in the farm, male, female, and not always does the men pay themselves either, but you may not be drawing from the farm, but you identify yourself though with the role that you are being paid, right? Even women when they're introducing themselves, you identify yourself as the mother. Where do you put that in versus if you're doing that with your career, with your family farm, and all the other roles you might be playing, right? Your bookkeeper. So looking at those, you can see basically we just kind of put ourselves always last. And the reason we do that is because we don't really see the value in the recognition. We see the value in the outcome of that work. So, and it looks like our second poll results are in, and it's the work-life balance that's the challenge. We're going to look at that a little bit more closely. And then the next in line from that is the gender stereotypes. And I would agree with both of those answers being two of the largest challenges. So let's take a look. Let's dive a little bit deeper. So these are our safety challenges. These are the barriers that women face on farms. So agriculture, of course, is a high risk industry. We have machinery, we have machinery, livestock, chemicals, confined space, fatigue. If we already look at all the hours that are being worked, so we face the same risks as men do, but we have some very specific gender challenges. So let's find out what those are. There's your work-life balance, but let's look at our physical challenges first. We have ill-fitting PPE, lack of tailored training on how to use that personal protective equipment. And then your stereotypes. So that is social and cultural. And we're looking at isolation. When women have all these roles and they're continuously working and they're completely involved with those roles, they don't have much of a network to bounce ideas or the time to bounce ideas off in different aspects. And we're going to look at mentoring and networking in a little bit. So they become very isolated. And then, of course, the gender bias. 67% of women reported disrespect. And this was in the Ontario Federation of Agriculture survey in 2020. And there's your work-life balance. We're juggling roles, which all this juggling leads to a great deal of fatigue. And it limits you to what you can attend, for instance, for training. Those network sessions, which we just talked about. Which again, if we can't meet the work-life balance, this can lead to mental health and wellness challenges as well. So stress from the discrimination within those roles, right? Lack of rural mental health resources. So let's take a little bit deeper dive here. I'll try to scroll slow. There we go. So in your physical barriers, I have a link here so that you can kind of follow up to this to see where this information is coming from. As I talked about at the beginning, a lot of the personal protective equipment are designed for that 5'9" male. So that's the average size of man. And so that's what the bulk of the PPE is designed after. I've advocated for women particularly designed with a small, medium, and large, not just an average woman size, those three sizes to start developing personal protective equipment. For starters, gloves, work boots, and how they fit. And it's become very difficult. I'll get a lot of pushback with designers saying it's a very small industry. We don't make a lot of money off it because there's not a lot of women buying it. My argument is always if it's available, they will buy it, right? So we need to advocate more and be more open instead of, and a lot of women I've worked with have a tendency to say, I'll just make do. So how many of you, you can add this to the chat, have said to yourself, I'll just make do? We're going to look at a case study of why that's probably not a good idea. I don't want to put up any fuss. I've got very little time, so I'm just going to make do with what I've got. Does that resonate with you? So physical demands, of course, of the tasks are like lifting and operating heavy machinery are often challenging because they don't have the adequate training, which we talked about. But where's the time for that? And I always look at time as, wouldn't it be nice to have a couple more hours of the day? But at the same time, would that not be a burden? Because then we would be trying to fit more things into those 2 hours. So will we be in the same spot with the same amount of time or added time? So looking at the social and cultural barriers, we won't stay here too long. We talked about the stereotypes, of course, and this could be discouraging. We like to just please everyone. So we have a tendency to not create any type of conflict. So with those stereotypes, we have a tendency just to avoid the situation. So we'll limit ourselves just to not have to deal with those particular situations. We talked about isolation as well as the gender bias, but there are some links there for you to just kind of dive a little bit deeper. Work-life balance. So we talked about the off-farm work, but now here I really incorporate that childcare and household duties, as well as the lead to fatigue of having to perform all those duties. The amount of time your brain is working to organize, even just these things that are listed here, can be exhausting. So how do we recruit? How do we regroup? How do we make things a little bit easier? We're going to look at some solutions. And then, of course, that time makes us limited. And I have to say, there is definitely stress and basically facing with not only our workload, but the gender discrimination and just any type of balancing of those roles can lead to mental health and wellness challenges. But I do make a comment, there's lack of access to mental health resources, but this is getting much better, and it has over the last few years. You look at most of the provinces, they have an agricultural program that focuses on agricultural workers. So you look here in Nova Scotia, we Talk, We Grow. Out west, there's the Do More Ag Foundation, right? In Ontario, you have the Canadian Centre for Agricultural Wellbeing. So there's more and more being done, and especially in the research aspect of it, to be able to provide those resources. And I need to encourage you to use them, because if you don't use them, we lose them. But at the same time, we try to make do again with what we have. But let's not do that anymore. Let's do better. Let's access these resources, get the help we need, and make some changes ourselves on those particular aspects as well. And so here's the case study. So we have a female farmer who is 55 plus, I won't name the age, who was injured by oversized gloves. So she just grabbed a pair of gloves that was available because she doesn't have anything for herself. And when she was using some machinery, she lost the grip on the particular machinery, which resulted in a preventable hand injury. Had she had the correct size of gloves, she could have grabbed onto the machinery as she was supposed to and would have had the grip for it. But with having made do, she suffered a hand injury, which kind of slowed her up quite a bit. And this incident really highlights the need for gender-specific PPE designs. And of course, this isn't just one instance, it's happening often. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper next into those women-specific farm injury data. But think about the times you've been out there, the near misses that you might have had, maybe some incidents you have suffered. What led up to it? Have you shared that? Did you just quickly move on from from the day to day and say, oh yeah, we'll do better next time, right? We'll just let that go. But let's take a look. There's not a lot of data. And I will mention this in each of these aspects just to remind you. Um, Women have not been focused on in a lot of these research groups and this data. So looking at fatalities among women in farm accidents. And so we dropped this in 1990 to 96. Farm-related fatalities in Canada showed a male to female ratio of 11 to 1, with 655 men and 61 women losing their lives. Among women, 45% of the fatalities were caused by runovers, such as being struck by machinery. So not them operating and rolling over, but being hit by the machinery they're working around. Comparing that to 32% of male fatalities caused by rollovers, like tractor overturns. So again, this data highlights the distinct risks faced by women on farms, often linked to their roles near machinery rather than operating it. And then again, this data is reliable, but there's very little of it and it's a little bit old. So look at non-fatal injuries requiring hospitalization. So between 1990 and 94, non-fatal injuries requiring hospitalization in Canada showed a male to female ratio of 3 to 1. So women under 60 were more likely to suffer injuries caused by animals, such as your livestock kicks and trampling, while women over 60 predominantly experience falls. So with 90% resulting in fractures. And then, of course, looking at gender differences in farm injury mechanisms. So this is a meta-analysis of Canadian studies that was confirmed that women's injuries on farms are more often non-machinery related, as we discovered with these two fatality and non-fatality accidents and hospitalizations, and resulting with animals and the falls. But in contrast, the men being involved more of the machinery related particular incidents. Now I've added here child care related risks on farm. As you know, this is one of the main roles of women, being the child care attendees for their own children, but many others as well. It could be relatives who also work on the farm, right? Brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, can be anyone. So whoever happens to be on that farm in that child care role happens to be affected by this. And I look at 1990 to 2008. 39% of child fatalities on Canadian farms were caused by runovers, such as being struck by farm vehicles. So as I know, not specific to women, this just, I find it relevant because the women still have to balance that role of childcare, and it's a very important role. So this highlights the need of improved childcare support and safety measures to reduce the risk of child-related accidents on farms. So although reliable, the data again is dated and may not reflect up to date today. And then of course, as I noted at the beginning, the data gaps. So historically, farm safety data has focused on male farmers, leading to underreporting of women's injuries. So women have reported safety risks such as ill-fitting personal protective equipment and lack of training, but these typically aren't captured in the quantitative data. One more polling question. So looking at what we've just kind of learned, which safety challenge for women on farms do you think needs the most urgent attention? Ill-fitting PPE, lack of tailored safety training, mental illness and stress, childcare related risks, because 39% of child runover fatalities, that was huge. So in your opinion, based on this poll question, which safety challenge for women on farms do you think needs the most urgent attention? So we kind of look at, despite these challenges, women are leading the charge in farm safety. And we're going to learn who those people are shortly, just after this poll. Oops, sorry. Ah, yes, mental health and childcare are the results of that poll. They kind of go hand in hand, absolutely. Let's learn a little bit more. So let's look at the women's contributions to farm safety. So look into leadership role, and maybe some of you are on the call today. So women are advocating for safer workplaces through organizations like the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. So we look at Canada's Farm Safe Plan, which provides excellent tools for developing farm safety programs. And many women lead and develop these programs. So these are resources that are huge time savers to be able to draft that plan and implement it on farm. So a few examples of these women that are in these roles that have done an excellent job over the years in promoting farm safety and providing resources. We have Sandra Miller, who is the new executive director at CASA, the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. Jody Wakowicz, executive director of Ag Safe Alberta, and Jody Young from WorkSafe Prevention Services, and Annabella Vu here, CEO of Ag Alliance of New Brunswick. So those are just four that I just grabbed out of the air, and I'm sure there's more, and we have an exercise that I'm going to learn more, so we'll add it to the chat. But first, let's look at those innovations that women have participated in to basically help us get to where we are and to be in some of those leadership roles. So even just on farm, you look at the automated systems, like we have automated milking systems. We talked already about the GIS mapping and precision agriculture being available. Renewable energy technologies. This is excellent when we're looking at the impacts of climate change. Mobile apps for farm management. This is a huge time saver. So livestock monitoring, right? So you have apps like AgriWeb and Farm Logs. The 40% adoption rate among the younger female operators, more so than the older operators who still rely on the paper and the pen, which can be a little bit challenging and more time consuming. But if we can get more women to adopt these particular record keeping techniques through apps, it is a great deal time. It is a huge time saver. And then, of course, we have the drones for crop monitoring. This saves a lot of time getting into the field. There are some that will still distrust automation, but I think a slow introduction will help convince people that these are excellent tools and resources, especially if we get into networking and looking at mentorship programs that show others that this particular technology works. And then, of course, energy efficient systems, so your drip irrigations and using different types of sensors for that particular mechanism of watering. Climate smart technologies. We're looking at 35% of organic farms operated by women using technologies like drought tolerant seeds and water saving drip irrigation here as well. And then the robotics and mechanized equipment. So small scale robotics. So we talked about the automated milkers up there, but we also have automated seeders and harvesters to include in that group as well. So let's look at mentorship and the network. How do you build a network? And this is basically a lot of my notes put on the slide, so we're not going to spend a lot of time here. I've added these notes in so you'd have access to go back and access this if you're interested. Quick, easy links are provided here. So some of the networks that you might think about kind of getting to know and learning more is the Ag Women's Network, of course. There's a mentorship program. Farm Credit Canada, of course, has a women entrepreneur program. Young agrarians, oh, sorry. I missed it up here. Sorry. Young Agrarians Business Mentorship Network. Influential Women in Canadian Agriculture. Beef Together and other regional networking events, of course, and of CARC. CARC's Agri-Talent Program is also listed here as well. Excellent resources to be able to bring women together and to learn from each other so we can thrive in the agricultural industry. And this is from Jody Young. Safety starts with inclusion. And I find this kind of interesting because here in the find and share, this is where I want you to enter into the chat. Find a farm safety resource led by women and share it. So you have 1 minute. That's it. That's all you get. And then we're going to move on. What would you say is the farm safety resource led by women that we haven't mentioned that is important to you? And as you put that and search that into the chat with your 1 minute, here's second to last polling question. Have you or someone you know participated in farm safety program led by women, like those from CASA or advancing in the Advancing Women conferences? Yes, and it was impactful. Yes, but it could be improved. No, I haven't, and I'm not sure. So as you can see, women are making a difference, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And so we're going to look at some solutions, and we're going to look at that in just 1 second here. So as I mentioned, there wasn't many women in those um, policy development roles or policy influencer roles, such as the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. But policy and industry recommendations are key to some of our solutions to improve PP access, enhance training, support these mentorship programs, promote the gender equity that is greatly needed, address mental health. When I say there's in recent years, and especially in the last 2 years, there's been a lot of work done in this space right here. So keep an eye out for that. And then of course, just as we talked about, technology accessibility is very key. It lessens that physical effort that women need to and have the ability to do the manual labor on farm. And then, of course, we still need community and individual actions. So we need to encourage men to challenge sexism and support women as equal partners. Celebrate female role models through media events and influential women in agriculture, right? Use those particular types of events to celebrate women and what they're doing, what their roles are. Get those younger females interested through celebration rather through discouragement with the amount of work it might be. It's very rewarding, but anything that you get a reward from is a bit of work, but it's a good payoff. Promote the use of those automated automation mitigated repetitive tasks. They decrease fatigue oh, I'm getting tongue twisted now. Greatly reduce fatigue related tasks. And these tasks, though, once you're fatigued, you make poor choices. You just do what's fastest and easiest. And this is where shortcuts can come into play. And so with shortcuts usually means incident and injuries, unfortunately. And engage young women in agriculture through the 4-H or safety education programs. So like here in Nova Scotia, we just developed the Nova Scotia Farm Technician Apprenticeship Program. So getting more women into these roles and understanding the basics and getting them built up to take on management roles on the farm. So our vision is a safer, more inclusive agricultural sector where women are empowered as safety leaders. So our call to action is let's work together to ensure every woman on a Canadian farm feels safe, valued, and supported. And going back to our poll, most of you answered no, I haven't participated in a particular women-focused training event. Very interesting. So this will follow up to this polling question, the very last polling question. Which recommendation do you think would have the biggest impact on improving safety for women in agriculture? So developing gender-specific PPE, which we would have to follow up with that training. And then with that training, offer flexible women-focused safety training, expanding mentorship programs, and increasing female leadership representation. So as you answer that poll, I'm also going to get you to look towards the chat to note your takeaway and action. So from today's presentation, Just reflect on what you've learned and what we talked about, some of the polling questions we've answered and the responses within those polling questions. List basically one action you'll take to support women's safety in agriculture and put that in the chat. And Caitlin will probably help me with that. And the response, I believe, for the last polling question, offer training for women. And I believe in having developed different training programs as well as delivered several training programs, it needs to be gender specific. It makes a big difference. Um, how we operate, how we work, how our minds work, because we can multitask through several things at one time. Our training doesn't need to be linear, so we can be more effective in our training when it's specifically developed for women. So I can see some changes in the future on how we develop programs as well as deliver. Oh, I see that in the next up was more women to lead in leadership roles. 100%. I agree with that. So looking at your takeaway, also, Caitlin's probably anticipating your questions. She was asking for them at the beginning, and here we are. We're ready to start answering some of those questions. And again, the presentation will be available later on, so you'll be able to go through all this. So
Lori, thank you so much for your presentation. We have some info here. So they're actionable takeaways. Evaluate staff PPE is one of them, which is good. And I think for myself as a farmer, it's something that I evaluate for myself as well. We do have some questions as well. Are you ready for them?
I'm ready.
Okay. So one of the questions that was asked is, why do you think that there is a lack of data that is submitted for injuries on a farm?
It's a really good question, and it honestly, unfortunately, has a very simple answer. We haven't been valued in industry enough to be in the numbers game to be able to provide enough data to have it evaluated. So as you saw, still we're 30.4% of producers in Canada. A lot of research organizations don't value that being enough people to have an influence on what is to change or to be able to provide the finances for it. I think they're looking at it incorrectly. I think it needs to be looked at, how do we get more women in agriculture and into these in different trades, right? In Canada. And it's by making better equipment, making and empowering more women to be able to speak on and say what they need and providing that. When it becomes available, workers will go to that. And women in particular, when they're low risk tolerance, which means if they have the safety means available, they're going to do the work. But if it's not, they're not willing to risk what they have to do that. Which means, so if they get hurt at work, who's going to take care of the kids? Who's going to do the bookkeeping? Who's going to feed the cows? Who's going to look after the chickens? Who's going to collect the eggs, right? Who's going to go into work for me and finish up the project? So there's a lot to lose for women when there's potential injury there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions that came in was, I was wondering how farm operator was defined for the Stats Canada data collection.
I don't have that in front of me, but in the references, when you click on it, it gives you a description of where they came up with their data.
Perfect. And I've let in the chat know, but I will say this out loud too. For those folks who have registered today, you will get a copy of Lori's presentation in the email with the recording following her presentation. I think we have time for one quick more question. How do the safety challenges for women in agriculture compare to those in other countries?
Oh, that's a good one. It's very comparable. They have many of the same similar challenges that we do, especially when it looks to ill-fitting PPE and the availability to attend training. Um, You look even at African countries, they don't have the personal protective equipment available, uh, same as we do. So it's very similar. It's not a unique Canadian situation, unfortunately, or fortunately. But honestly, I'm surprised not more work has been done in this space over these years. And just to kind of follow up to that, Caitlin, if I can, there's another author, Karen Messing out of Quebec. She's Canadian author, and she's written Bent Out of Shape, and it's shame, solidarity, and women's bodies at work. And she focuses on where women have come from in relation to the workforce and what's available to them to make work better for them in relation to ergonomics and just adapting personal protective equipment. So if you're looking for more information from behind the scenes too, to learn more and use when you go talk to your personal protective equipment supplier, you can say, hey, I need this, and get it backed up, get women's networks to write letters, right? Get your voice heard. And this is the way we affect change. We may be small in numbers, but we can be mighty in our voice, I think.
Absolutely. And that is a great way to end us off here today. Lori, thank you so much again for all of this information. I have all of my notes and I have my next reading list all ready to go.
Very good. Thank you again very much for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to present this.
Thank you. Thank you again so much, Lori. That does it for our time here today. I hope you were all able to take away actionable insights that will give you confidence when it comes to operating your farm. As I've mentioned before, you will receive a link to today's recording and a copy of Lori's presentation within the next few days. You will also receive an email in your inbox from FCC with a event evaluation. They would love it if you could fill it out and help them plan their next future events for us farmers. On behalf of FCC, thank you so much for joining us here today. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you back here real soon.